For the first little bit after the Fatali's video, everyone just relaxed with their monsters, trying to relieve some of the stress and push the heavier subjects to the back of their minds. It was pretty simple for the most part. Nora, Ruby, Ilya, and Velvet trotted around on the backs of their respective monsters, except for Velvet, who flew because Sergio's Emerald watched Mesmeralda dance to some music she put on, Pyrrha trying to lay down and relax alongside Arachne on a web the spider built, and John sharpened his sword along with Guillotine's tail. Lastly, Blake had summoned a number of boxes for herself and Sierra to jump into. But while she had expected the Nargacuga to jump into another larger box, she jumped into the same one as the cat Faunus, trapping her under herself. The rest of the students were simply laying around and cuddling with and/or petting their monsters. As for the adults, Summer was doing the same as the majority of the students, simply cuddling with Amaryllis, hoping that showing the beast kindness and affection would tone down its antisocial and aggressive tendencies. Hazel was playfully sparring with his crow was throwing a bowling ball-sized tennis ball to Omen, who caught it and brought it back like a dog. Then the others were teaching their monsters to do tricks. But while Glinda and Winter were teaching their pets normal pet tricks, like rolling over, shake their paws and playing dead, Ironwood was teaching Stratus how to do bullhead drills and maneuvers, Adam was teaching Alexandrus to attack people badmouthing Faunus, and Ozpin was trying to convince the Elder Dragon to eat his paperwork. Finally, the students reconvened and started making small talk amongst themselves. So, that last one was pretty crazy, huh? Good thing Katana's not putting one of them on Remnant. Young said. Do we know which monsters Katana is and isn't bringing to Remnant? Blake asked. Hopefully all of them, as long as they aren't ones she didn't specifically say she's not bringing. Nora said. Still, it would be good if she gave us a list. Obviously, we'll have our monsters, and probably more of their species, as well as the ones that are the least of a threat. Weiss theorized. Suddenly, a note was carried to them by a lovely pink hummingbird with 2 long tail feathers. I will be sending Nibelsnarf to Remnant, if that helps. Neo read. Not really. That's just one monster out of like 100 we know of. She's just trying to mess with us now. Cinder said in annoyance. However, while the more mature ones were annoyed by this message, the more excitable ones were anything but. Who cares? We're getting a sand shark. Nora cheered before she got an idea. Ooh. I know. Let's put saddles on them and we can ride them like rodeo bulls. Yeehaw. Nora said, getting Sigrun to rear up on her hind legs in classic fashion. Ah, yeah. Now you're talking. And why stop there? We could do a super rodeo with all different kinds of monsters. Yang said excitedly. This caught the attention of her uncle and mother. That would be pretty interesting to watch, let alone do it yourself. Crow agreed. Yeah, I'd buy a ticket to that event. I bet tons of others would, too. Summer added eagerly. Not to mention all the lean that could be brought in by betting on who stays on the monster the longest. She said eagerly, rubbing her hands together. And this led to a series of brainstorms from everyone else with how to handle the monsters in their world. Couldn't we just do something simple, like having a monster petting zoos, like they had in Cretaceous World? Velvet asked, thinking of the scenes where the kids played with baby dinosaurs. Cute idea, but I'm pretty sure a large number of the monsters have scales that are super rough and possibly harmful to the touch. Weiss pointed out. Instead, perhaps we could make an enclosure that simulates their natural environment, then we can have peaceful safaris at a safe distance. She suggested. Sounds like Velvet's not the only one that watched Cretaceous Park. Yang said with a smirk. Maybe we could make a restaurant where monsters are part of the staff, like tying big plates to their neck or back and they carry the orders to the customers. Cinder offered her idea. That could be cool, but it also might be a health hazard. Blake said uncertainly. We should have several larger, bulkier monsters to patrol the borders of the kingdoms from either Grimm or other hostile monsters at all times. Huntsmen and huntresses should be able to handle any smaller threats that get past the larger monsters. Then, advanced strike teams can be made from the stronger and faster monsters to take out Grimm beyond the borders of our kingdoms and take more land back from the Grimm. Then, we can plan on commencing an all-out assault on Salem. Ironwood theorized. Do you ever have any ideas that don't involve warfare? Hazel asked with a deadpan expression. James, you can't be planning to use these creatures only for their destructive prowess. They're living creatures with feelings and emotions. Glenda criticized. But they have so much potential to be used for the benefit of humanity. Ironwood insisted. I'm sorry, sir, but she's right. These creatures don't deserve to be used only as pawns to destroy our enemies. Nothing does. Winter told him. I'm afraid they're correct, James. After all, don't you recall it was the humans' abuse of the monsters that lead to the Great Dragon War in the first place? Do you truly wish to lead Remnant into another age of war, but this time against creatures that make the Grimm seem harmless? Ashvin questioned. Ironwood went to speak again, but sighed. Why does it seem every idea I have only dooms Remnant? He wondered. Your heart is in the right place, James. You just need to limit the extremes you're willing to go to. Your future actions in the main timeline should have taught you that much. Glinda told him. Crow then walked up and patted the general on the back. Yeah, how about next time, you just think to yourself, does my idea involve enslaving monsters? Okay, let's not do that. Crow added. Thankfully, the students were having more fun and colorful ideas. Oh, we should totally have cage matches where two monsters fight for a whole giant crowd of people, like a wrestling match, but with giant monsters instead of people. Yang said excitedly. And the gambling ring works on that, too. Put money on which monster will win. Neo added. That would be so awesome. Monster fights sound like the coolest thing ever. Ruby cheered. I don't know, girls. That feels a little close to animal abuse. Pyrrha said. Yeah. Sorry, but you're basically describing illegal dog or cockfights. Velvet agreed. Velvet. John cried out, shocked at the language Velvet just used. She means chickens, dummy. It's another word for roosters. Coco told him. Yang wasn't giving up on this idea, though. It's gonna be fine, girls. We'll treat the monsters respectfully, we'll let them stay in open fields and take care of their wounds after every fight and make sure they get plenty of exercise and play. And if they don't want to fight, we won't make them. I've thought it out, don't worry. Yang assured them. I, for one, think it would be a good idea to start a new zoology course for these creatures. And not just at Beacon, but all huntsman academies. If these creatures will truly pop up all over Remnant when Katana sends them to the planet, then it will be important for everyone everywhere to understand these new creatures. Penny explained. I believe that would be a very wise course of action, Penny. There is so much to learn and tell about these creatures, quite obviously. There's their biology and behavior, the best ways to approach them, as well as the best way to deal with their strengths, powers, skills, weaknesses, and battle tactics, among other things. Not only that, but it's important to ensure that they can see these creatures as just that, creatures. Animals and not monsters, which they can appreciate as the magnificent works of nature they are. Glinda agreed. I would love to take that class. I promise, it will be one I don't sleep through. Ruby said excitedly. Ruby. Did I hear that right, dear? You sleep through your classes? Some are said in a sickeningly sweet tone, poorly hiding the danger behind it as RWBY began to sweat bullets. And the brainstorming session continued from there. Hazel suggested something similar to Yang, only instead of two monsters fighting, it would be humans facing the creatures in unarmed combat. Unsurprisingly, not many people went with this one. Also perhaps not a surprise was Coco's suggestion, as the fashionista had the idea of making clothing options for the monsters, since people often like to dress their pets up, along with themselves. Unfortunately, this idea was also dead upon arrival, as many pointed out how it would be pretty much impossible to put anything other than simple accessories on monsters. Like how would you put a fancy t-shirt on an Argakuga? And finally, Weiss surprisingly had the highly questionable idea of using monsters in a cooking show, having creatures like Glavenus and Odogaron chop and dice up ingredients and have fire-based monsters cook the food, or having water monsters create soups and stews. Once again, Blake had to point out the health code violations. However, there were several good ideas that came from these brainstorming sessions. Adam actually came up with the decent idea of using the monsters for certain classes, such as stealth and survival training, trying to avoid the monsters and hide yourself from their superior senses. As the participating students made their way for a goal, the monsters would be patrolling around. Pyrrha had the interesting idea of training the monsters to be either service/emotional support animals, either used for people with medical, emotional, or mental issues, such as anxiety or stress, since a giant monster would be quite effective as a deterrent or preventative for things that may cause someone anxiety, or obviously to work alongside people working dangerous jobs, such as police, firefighters, or obviously, once again, huntsmen and huntresses. And lastly, Neo had the lovely idea of making video games revolving around the creatures, both fighting against them and a spin-off series where you can tame and ride them, using the creatures to perfectly mocap and choreograph the movements they do in-game. But as they had these brainstorming sessions, time seemed to fly by, and before any of them knew it, it was time for all of them to turn in for the night. Aw, man. That was getting so much fun. I would have loved to hear more ideas. RWBY pouted, laying down on her bed. I'm sure we'll get more time to do that in the future, little Rose. Cinder assured her, laying on the bed beside her. Yang flopped down on her stomach on her own bed across from RWBY. Cinder's right, Rubes. There will always be plenty of time to come up with more ideas for the monsters. But for now, we need the most important time of all, beauty sleep. Can't let these good looks go to waste. She assured her sister, before flashing a wink to Neo, who rolled her eyes, but still smiled. Slowly, but surely, all of the others began to wind down and close their eyes, slowly letting sleep overtake them. It was a bit of a longer process for RWBY, but soon enough, even her seemingly limitless energy began to dwindle, her eyelids becoming heavy, and they slowly became harder and harder to open, until finally, they stayed close and she was trapped in the deep grip of sleep. RWBY then opened her eyes again, only this time, things were a bit different. First of all, she was in her chibi form. And second of all, after registering her surroundings, she realized something about her bed. It wasn't a bed. It was a Snow Baron Lagombi, its massive, furry body making the perfect bed, and its giant, fuzzy forelegs were draped over her like a blanket while the creature was holding her close. RWBY was in awe at this, before a large smile soon spread across her face. Oh, yeah. This is gonna be a fun day. She told herself as she took off, preparing for the things she would do that day. Her first stop saw her walking out onto a platform at the top of an impossibly massive aquarium, looking down at the giant water source below. After a few moments of staring, she lifted up another massive item in the form of a can of fish food at least 3 times her size, and began to shake it. Come on, guys. Feeding time. RWBY called, several pairs of eyes emerging from the depths and looking up at her. Okay. Here we go. Moz. Ruby said, tossing a large salmon-like fish off the platform and over a water, where a Xantrios launched out from the water, snatching the fish and eating it. Basil! She called again, tossing another fish out for a tidal Najarala. Levi! She yelled for the next creature, this time tossing a grouper over the water, where it was nabbed by a Cedius. Drake! She called the next creature, a Lagiacris, catching the next salmon. Monsoon! She shouted for the next beast, a Plesiath, taking the meat. And Medusa! She called for the final beast, an Acarcos popping up and nabbing the grouper that was thrown, before its tentacles rose us and started snapping. Hey! No more! You had yours! She scolded, before the tentacles sent her flying and took the rest of the food. Next, the girl was at the beach, sitting next to a large rock, which she was painting a mural on of a lovely meadow in the springtime. However, the boulder soon moved and turned around, where it was revealed that it was a daimyo hermitor and she had been drawing on its shell. Oh. Heh. Sorry. Honest mistake. Won't happen again. Ruby said, before a Shogun Senator approached the two of them angrily, several doodles adorning its shell as well. I mean, it's pretty, right? You can't get mad at art. She insisted, before the daimyo blasted her away with its bubble breath. Ruby tumbled across the ground several times, before getting up with a pout, sending a glare at the two crab monsters. You don't understand my vision. She insisted, before storming back to Beacon. Sometime later, Ruby was at an amusement park, waiting eagerly for her turn on the newest ride. Finally, she heard the attendant call the next person, which was her. Yes. Oh, my gosh. Finally. This is gonna be great. She cried out happily as she hurried forwards and got onto the ride, the attendant quickly strapping her in. And why was Ruby so excited for this new ride in particular? Well, it wasn't any simple bumper cars or lame log ride. No, Ruby had a helmet put on her, before being strapped to a saddle on the back of a Valstrax, ready for a ride that promised to be better than any roller coaster. Alright. Let's go, Valstrax. Away. Ruby cried out, the elder dragon letting out a fierce cry as it took to the skies, soaring around at speeds a bullhead couldn't reach. This is the best. Ruby cheered in excitement, even as she struggled to hold on to the saddle, a couple of straps holding her and already having broken off. 1. After this, Ruby was then seen on the top of a large, rocky hill, looking out over a large expanse of other steep, rocky hills perfect for dirt biking. But she wasn't doing that, however. Alright. Let's do this, roll out. She declared as she stood next to an Uragan, putting on a pair of goggles and jumping up in the air along with the Uragan, at which point she landed on the back of the beast as it rolled into a ball, running on top of it in a similar manner to the kinship attack she had witnessed, rolling along over the expanse of hills. A further lapse of time would show the young red huntress in training in the middle of a clearing in the Emerald Forest, fighting a number of Grimm that rivaled even the numbers of the Breach. The Crimson Reaper fought valiantly, but she was quickly being overwhelmed, before she was finally knocked down and disarmed by a King Taijutsu. Oh, no! She cried out, before sighing. I guess this is it, then. She told herself as the snake monster closed in. Suddenly, a deep, guttural roar rang out, before a massive form suddenly flew over her, slamming into and decimating the King Taijutsu. Once Ruby registered what had just happened, she soon recognized her savior. Nergigant! She yelled in shock, the spiky beast looking back to her and nodding as if to say, "We've got this." Ruby smirked and nodded in understanding, picking up Crescent Rose. Alright, then. Let's do this. She declared, rushing in with the Elder Dragon, taking out Grimm by the dozens, all while doing epic superhero poses with the monster. Some time later, Ruby was now with the rest of her team and friends as they were in Beacon's courtyard, which was currently covered in snow. The group laughed and played, enjoying themselves as they made several snowmen, splitting into different pairs to make different and unique figures of frozen water. Aw, man. This was such a great idea. We should totally do this more often. At least, as long as Weiss can get Valka to make snow for us again. The youngest student said as the Gammoth was revealed to be standing a small distance away, shooting the snow out of its trunk to coat the area like a snow machine. Shortly after this, a Mizutsun was seen walking down one of Beacon's long hallways, brushing its tail along the floor to make it nice and soapy. Once it reached the end of the aisle, it turned around and gave 2 quick bark-like noises as a signal that it had finished its duty. Ruby smirked, standing down at the other end of the extensive hallway, dressed in a one-piece bathing suit. Ah, yeah. The ultimate slip and slide. Here we go. She cried out as she took a few running steps forward, before diving forward, landing on the soap trail and sliding down it. Wee-ee. She shouted cheerfully as she swiftly slid down the hallway, before crashing through the doors at the end of the hall. Worth it. She called weakly, the Mizutsun rolling its eyes and wandering off. At a later juncture, Ruby was now in a workshop, sweating greatly as she was grinding an absolutely massive sword in order to sharpen in. She carefully measured and weighed the blade in order to get the grind down to the exact specifications, double and even triple checking her work, before finally deciding that the job she did on the blade was satisfactory. And done. There you go, John. Now pay up. Ruby instructed as it was revealed she had actually been grinding off excess bits off Guillotine's tail, and her moving the blade around to do the various tasks she did on the blade was actually the brute wyvern moving its tail around for her. Regardless, the blonde knight still gave her the lean she was owed. Next, the red-hooded girl was in the Forever Falls, looking around carefully for something. She popped out of the top of a tree, looking around for any signs of her target. She peeked around each and every tree for the thing that she searched for. She even went as far as to peek into a knothole in order to find her goal, only for a family of squirrels to leap out at her. The young reaper then tiredly stomped to the very edge of the forest, covered in tree sap, leaves, twigs, and some fur from the squirrels. She then sighed at this. Okay. Fine. I give up. You win. Now come on out, already. She called, looking around for her hide-and-seek opponent. What she didn't realize, however, was that the camellia she was playing with was right behind her, until it shot its tongue out and hit her in her butt, causing her to scream and fly off with her semblance. At another point in time, Ruby was in a much more lush and dense forest with much higher trees. The girl herself stood in one of the top branches of these super tall trees, fastening a white string around her waist. After ensuring it was firmly secured around herself, she looked back at the Nursilla spinning the line of silk she had tied around her waist. Okay. This is gonna be epic. Ruby told the oversized arachnid as she leapt out of the tree, descending towards the ground rapidly, before the string reached its limits, stretching out a bit more as the silk allowed a bit of give, before quickly snapping back, taking Ruby along with it as she cheered in joy and excitement, landing next to the Nursilla again. That was so much fun, she declared. Afterward, Ruby decided to calm things down and spend some peaceful quality time with her number 1 monster, taking Crimson for a peaceful walk through the park, Spy happily trotting alongside her. Ah, today has been fun, but nothing beats a day at the park with my best buds. Ruby said, stopping and crouching down, petting them both as they nuzzled and licked her face. She then noticed a couple of sticks beside her, grabbed them. Okay, you ready boys? Fetch. She declared, tossing the sticks, the 2 canine creatures running after them. Soon enough, Spy came back with his stick, but Crimson had yet to return. Huh. I wonder what's taking him. Ruby wondered, before she and Vi were shocked to see Crimson returning with a dead creep in his mouth. Crimson dropped the dead Grim at Ruby's feet and began wagging his tail, panting like a dog. Wow. I wasn't expecting that. Good boy. Ruby said awkwardly, but still petting the fanged wyvern. Later on, Ruby was walking into a bullfighting arena, waving to the huge crowd of people, bowing and winking, throwing the occasional peace sign at the people cheering for her, before catching a bouquet of roses that was tossed to her by Cinder, who was in the VIP section along with Ruby's friends and family. Soon enough, she stepped into the center of the ring, at which point, the pen on the other end of the arena from where she entered was opened, a Diablos charging through and roaring furiously. Come on, Diablos. Everyone says you're so tough, but from where I'm standing, you're nothing. Ruby declared. This angered the beast, who charged towards Ruby in a rage as she held her cape out as a muleta, before quickly dodging out of the way and causing the Diablos to collide face first into the metal anvil that somehow appeared after Ruby moved her cape, knocking it out. She bowed to the beast, before skipping off to claim her prize, a year's supply of cookies. More time passed and now Ruby was repeatedly bouncing high into the air, as if she were bouncing on a trampoline. This is so much fun. Ruby cheered as it was revealed that she was actually bouncing on a Dodogama's big, bouncy belly while the monster laid on its back, enjoying getting his chin scratched by Yang. This is why you are best boy, she said as she continued to bounce. Don't worry, sis. We can switch so you can have a turn in 5 more minutes, she assured her sister as she continued to bounce. After this, Ruby now found herself in a flooded forest, looking all around her, unaware of an almudron rising up out of the water behind her. She suddenly sensed the presence behind her, turning around in shock to see the mighty mud leviathan behind her. The creature let out a mighty roar and grabbed a giant ball of mud in its tail, raising it high before slamming it down. But then, with the two of them now having a large supply of mud, they began to make a mud castle together, slowly patting it out in the form they desired. I doubt this is what she meant, but Neo is right, it is fun to play dirty, Ruby said as she continued to form a tower on the castle. More time had gone by and Ruby had now made her way to Mountain Glen once again and now stood faced with another small army of Grimm, as well as the many abandoned buildings in total disrepair. I think this place needs to be remolded. Think you can help with that, Bullwinkle? Ruby asked as she looked down at the Bambaro she now rode on the back of. The moose-like brute wyvern let out a loud roar as it rushed forward with its head lowered, completely plowing through all of the Grimm and bringing down the ruined buildings with speed and efficiency that would put a bulldozer to shame. Much later still, Ruby was zooming around a large field, planting down several seeds for various plant life. Soon enough, she had planted all the seeds she had. Alright. Now comes the fun part. Let a rip, Coral. Ruby called out as she held on to the tail of a coral Pukei, the bird wyvern nodding and dunking its head into a water trough, gulping down large amounts of liquid, which soon shot out of its tail and all over Ruby's intended garden. Then, in a matter of minutes, all kinds of trees and bushes popped up, with all different kinds of flowers, berries, and other fruits popping up all over them. This is great. We'll be able to feed all of Beacon with this stuff. And you, too, Balloon Boy, Ruby said, patting the ground, before it was revealed she and this garden were on the back of a Yamatsukami. Even more time had gone by, but Ruby now found herself on an incredibly tall mountain that almost looked like a spiraling drill head or a spear. Somehow, the young Rose had made her way to the Speartip Crag and stood right in front of Dalamadur's face. The huntress and the serpent stared each other down for several moments, as if the two of them were daring the other to make the first move. But eventually, the massive snake simply laid its head down on the plateau Ruby stood on, allowing her to jump on its head. After that, she stepped to the very edge of the back of its head, moving forward and going down the beast's body like an enormous slide. Rabababadoo. Ruby cheered like the quartz rocks as she slid down the creature's super long body. 2. After more time has passed, Ruby could now be seen on a jet ski. "Come on, where is it?" she questioned as she looked over the desert expanse with a pair of binoculars. Oh, yeah, she had made a sand version of a jet ski, by the way, which she was now riding through the desert's vacuo. Suddenly, her search paid off, as the massive form of a Gen Moran launched itself out of its sandy ocean, before crashing down and moving alongside her, even playfully swearing back and forth from one side of her to the other, before it continued to launch out of the water several times like a dolphin. And finally, later in the evening, Ruby and Cinder were relaxing together in a hot springs. Ah, this is the life. Today was totally incredible, Ruby said happily, before leaning in close to Cinder. And there's no way I'd rather finish my evening than with you, Cinder, she said, earning an ah from the half-maiden, before the two leaned in for a kiss. But as they readied their mouths and moved closer, the water began to greatly heat up, to the point it was almost starting to boil. "Okay, easy with the heat, dude," Ruby yelled at a dire Miralise, who had been the one heating up the watering hole they had converted into a hot spring. Eventually, morning of the day after they watched more of the MCU came. Ah. Why does it always have to be a dream? Ruby questioned sadly, before getting up. And once she was up, the others followed and soon, everyone got up and did their morning routines, ready for whatever Katana had planned for them for the day. They came out into the main room to see Katana had a classic breakfast spread of banana pancakes, eggs, and sausage ready for all of them. Wow, what a meal! What's the occasion? Emerald asked. Well, I just wanted to make sure you guys were in a good mood before we dive into more monsters. Even for us, fatales isn't an easy thing to get over sometimes. And even some of the more mild monsters we've seen can still be pretty crazy, so I just wanted to make sure you all were in a good mood and prepared for that. Well, I can certainly agree with that. Glinda agreed. Hey, any excuse for an awesome breakfast is alright with us, Summer said, her family quickly letting out a cheer of yeah. So, what's next, Cat? Yang asked as they all took their respective seats. Well, you're in luck. There's been 1 or 2 lures on this monster already, but they were made before the discovery of the monster subspecies, so they'd be no good now. But thankfully, Sai just made a new video about it. So get ready to check out one of the hottest brute wyverns out there, Anjanath, Katana said, starting the video.